Hello. We could edit this out. So go ahead and start.
Hello, hello. We are podcasting and it's great to be here. Hey, Lisa.
Are we podcasting though? I'm not entirely sure if this is working.
Are we recording?
Yeah, we are. It's all good.
Okay. Uh,
Yes. Hi. I'm so excited to be here. We sort of said this last week, but we've been doing this is always the things we know, but at the same time, it's not been as lighthearted as it was kind of at the beginning. And so I'm excited because in July we're doing all sort of just fun topics and we kick it off today.
yes, I'm super happy to be here with you too, just because we don't get enough time together. So, yeah.
True.
So today it's a fun conversation. We're gonna share, we're gonna talk about some of our favorite books, like what we're reading, or actually like what we always go back to, because I think we talked about like we want to do we hear other podcasters do it and it's kind of fun, like what
Hmm.
you're reading, what you're watching. And I don't know about you. I used to be a voracious reader. I'd be like, okay, I've got these five books. And I feel like the way that life and sleep and this time of life goes for me, if I get horizontal, I fall asleep. And so it's frustrating for me to fall behind on books. For the longest time, I wasn't watching anything because I was always trying to catch up on books. And then I'll go through periods where I'm doing neither, but trying to sleep. And then, maybe reading like articles or, like things that I want to catch up on. So anyway, it's fun to talk about like what are the books I often go back to or referred to, or, the ones that kind of made an indelible impression on me that I love to share with other people. And you definitely have those too. So I think we're going to start with that. It's like, what are the go-to books for us?
Yeah, I want to do a little of both. Like we'll talk about the kind of the ones that we use all the time, either for ourselves or for our clients, and then some of the fun stuff we've been reading. But it's interesting. I have never considered myself a voracious reader. My parents both were. I mean, a very uh, clear memory, vision in my head of my parents when I was little was my mom in her chair and my dad on the couch reading, and
Same.
so my dad was one of those guys that would read like three books at a time, and I don't know what it was. I just never was a big reader. And then when I got older, I used to joke that my book was Vanity Fair because Vanity Fair was like a book in and of itself. So, and I got that for years. And so I felt like I'm reading, I'm just not reading books. And then I really, of course, I'm married to a writer. So that's kind of ridiculous that I don't read. I've read all of Darren's books. I will say that. Um, but 2020 with all the lockdown and all the time we had, I read a lot of books that year. I think I actually read about 10, which was unusual for me, but they were heavy books. They were books
Mhm.
about being how to be anti-racist, and Caste is a favorite of mine. And
I love that book. Oh,
oh my
that's such a good
God,
book.
yeah, well, that is such a good book. And so I think then when everything sort of got back to normal, I did too. And I'm like you, I tend to read at night, and the minute I start reading, I fall asleep. So the ones that were, that's why I was kind of going back to the ones that are the go-tos, because these to me are the ones that I read kind of straight through without falling asleep.
Mm. I was thinking of that meme that that it's there's two different hobbies. Like, reading books and buying books are two different hobbies. I am so guilty of that. Like I still like to check things out from the library. If I see something's
Mm,
available, I will borrow books, and I will have this intention of like, ooh, I want to read these, and they'll be this beautiful, fun, like provocative stack next to my bed for way longer than I have time for them, right? Like, so then I have to
yep.
return some of them to the people I borrowed them from in the library. And I'm like, wish I could have just learned those through osmosis. So I'm trying to remember to do more audible books mixed in with my podcast. So,
Yeah, see, I
because I,
can't listen to books. I'm a reader. I have to
yeah.
see. I'm a visual person, but yeah, for somebody who doesn't really read, I also have a stack of books next to my bed. I have two books under my computer here that I haven't read. I have a stack over there. So even though I don't consider myself a reader, I tend to buy books because somebody
Yeah.
says, "Oh, this is a great book," and I'm like, "Ooh, I'm going to get that. That sounds
Yeah,
amazing."
yeah,
You know,
totally. And
but
then we interview people who write great books, and we're like, I want to read that. And so,
absolutely,
my
yeah.
attention. I'm a little bit like squirrel
But I
with
think
books.
it's interesting that, Darren and I were actually having this conversation. I was telling him that this is what we were recording this week. And two of the three, I mean, we're going to talk, I have two books I want to talk about, but there's one book here too, at the end, the sort of fun ones. In both of these cases, like I've had these books forever. And so I remember when I was learning and reading about Marie Kondo, and one of her things was like, obviously not one of her things, her thing is if it doesn't give you joy, get rid of it. And she talked about books. And I remember that being a big piece of controversy with my reader friends, because they were like, sometimes books, you don't read books the minute you get them, and that's how I feel about these two books in particular, and that I'm going to talk about today, two of the three, because I had them for a long time. I started them when I got them and they didn't land for me. And then a year and a half later, they totally did. And so I think it is valuable to buy a book when you sort of feel the intuition around it, but also recognize you may not read it right away. It might not be the right time.
That's so true. I remember once because I would start, I'll always have like three or four, like right now. In fact, one of the books I am reading is How to Break Up with Your Phone, mainly because if for nothing else, like, I'm going through some really debilitating, weird neck and shoulder nerve stuff. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, it can't help, like, that
Mm-mm.
I'll do the crossword and the wordle and the connections like on my phone. I will, conduct a little bit of business on my phone. It's like it's doing these really bad things to my neck. So I'm like,
Oh,
how to break up with your phone.
it's making
But
me
then I
want to.
realized holding the book is doing the same thing. So that's
I
why
don't know.
Audible.
I don't think it is. I mean, a book you tend to hold out front, where your phone, you're really going deep, like I think so. At
Yeah,
least that's the way
but
I
I'm
do.
thinking about like the way I sit in a chair, where I'm holding them are the same.
Oh,
And my
that's
husband would
interesting.
that like the way it might be the way I'm like looking down at my book with my vision. I'm not sure.
Interesting.
I hold them both in the same place where I can see them best with my aging eyes. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't you start with one of your favorite go-to books?
Okay. There's a lot. I think I've noticed recently that I continue to return often. I didn't for a while. You know how you like can forget and then something will come up and you go back to it again. One of Brene Brown's earlier books that I knew about, I don't think it was her first book, I can't remember, but is The Gifts of Imperfection
Mm,
by Brene Brown. And I think, I what struck me about it when I first read it, it had been recommended to me a lot of times, and it didn't really speak to me because I don't think of myself as a perfectionist. I'm always like, I'm a
mm,
little type B, like that's good enough kind of thing. And yet, like so people recommended it to me probably because they could see some of that, just sort of generational perfectionism or that just self-criticism that comes from like a more sneaky version of perfectionism,
hmm
but people, thought I might like it. And so when I finally read it, I was struck by the foreword where she was like, I didn't set out to write a book about imperfection or perfectionism. I set out to write a book on wholehearted living. And
Wow.
I just kept coming in, like getting faced with, like, sort of confronted by my need for perfectionism or my, discomfort with imperfection. And it
Mm,
just kept coming up. And then there was something that she said in there. It doesn't sound like it directly relates, but I always remember it where it was like this realization that as daughters and as mothers and just human beings in this, like never ending pattern is that we cannot give our children what we don't possess ourselves.
mm,
And, so like if we are constantly hard on ourselves and we don't have, a generous, wholehearted acceptance of just who we are as humans, we want that for our kids, but telling them won't give it to them. It's literally like has to be possessed and role modeled. And this
yeah.
always comes up for me when we would do family dinner table in coaching, like
Yeah.
where your parents want to give you all the good things. They accidentally also hand over the hard things, but maybe the
Yeah.
perfectionism, the hard on yourself thing. So that just captured me. And
Mm,
so I think it invited me to embrace vulnerability and authenticity in a deeper way. I already thought I was doing that, but I think it was like, oh yeah, I got to get really real about how frozen I get when I think I'm not going to do something well enough.
mm,
Um, but it's also lighthearted and funny, and it's poignant in a way that grabbed me a lot at the time and over, simple and profound, all of that. Um, I don't know. I return to it kind of as a mom when I see this with my kids, and
mm.
as someone who supports, like, the self-love journey of other women, because I think it highlights, I don't know, the importance of letting go and embracing imperfection as your greatest teacher,
Mm.
of knowing that um, that it's the other side of the coin of shame to want
Yeah.
things to be a certain way, and it really puts up blocks, right? It creates all of that division that women end up feeling so isolated with. And I don't think I was ever so bad at it that I wasn't, like, sharing with people where I felt vulnerable, but it really invited me to see that differently, and I love it, and I recommend it often, and it's such a quick read. It's such a small book that, and I think it packs a punch. So yeah.
Interesting. It's funny. I have never read Brene. I saw the Netflix special and then I
Mhm.
went out and bought, is it Atlas of the Heart?
I
So
love that one. Yeah.
again, another book that is sitting here somewhere in my house that I haven't
It's a
read.
beautiful book. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I loved the Netflix special. I remember crying and just absolutely loving it. You're right. She's funny, she's poignant, and she just feels like somebody there's no way in hell we'll ever get her on our pod. I don't
Yeah.
believe. Maybe someday, but like she'd be a friend,
Yes.
that's what I love about her. But then the funny part of it is I don't listen to books on tape. I just don't resonate that way. And yet I had an Audible subscription for years, so it was one of those things that I've been paying for every month. And I finally went in again in recovery of surgery, like just randomly doing things. I'm like, I'm going to get rid of Audible. Why had all these credits? So I just went and downloaded all of Brene's books. I'm like, I don't know if I'm ever going to read them, but I got all these credits. So I'm just going to
Awesome.
put her all in my
Especially when
Audible.
they're in her voice too. Like, a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
them are in her
yeah.
voice.
Yeah.
I there's also HBO. I don't know if it's still there, but HBO Max or whatever they call it. They change the
It's
names of all these
Max.
things
It's
all the
just called
time. Oh,
Max.
Max. Okay. There's, I think, a 5-part special based on Atlas of the Heart, where
Oh,
she's in
okay.
front of an audience interacting with them, and it's
Hmm.
it's gorgeous. It's neat.
Okay.
There's aspects of that I feel like we've covered here and I referred to, but it's good. It's so good.
I will have to go check that out. I did not know that existed. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it.
So what's one of yours?
Um, Okay, so this first one is the perfect example of buying a book and not resonating with it and then resonating with it a couple years later. So I actually have mine in front of me for YouTube purposes. It is The Confidence Code for Women
Nice.
by Katty K and Claire Shipman. And any of you who have been my client that might be listening to the pod are well aware that this is something I recommend to pretty much every woman I know. I first heard about it. Let's see, I think it first came out, I want to say maybe in 2015. And at the time I was working for Weight Watchers, and one of my best friends there, Lisa Kruger Gavin, decided to, I don't know, Weight Watchers was giving us some leeway on doing things that were more about the inner game around weight loss. It was a brief moment in Weight Watcher history, but it was a beautiful time. And Lisa did a book club for this. And I didn't go to it. It was just something she ran. But I remember her really loving this book. And so I think I bought it at the time. And then I started to read it. It wasn't just, like I said, it wasn't resonating. It wasn't that I didn't like it. It wasn't resonating with me. Then we moved to LA and I bought The Confidence Code for Girls, which
Mm.
is a really, I also recommend this a lot, especially to moms who have preteens, because it's sort of a graphic novel, so it's like in comic form, and it's really interesting the way they do it. They do, like, they tell a story and then they ask some questions like, what do you think should have happened? What would you have done? So it's kind of an interactive workbook. And again, I had this vision of doing a book club with Charlotte and some of her friends from back in Chicago. I felt like it'd be a way to over Zoom. It'd be a way to keep connection with them, so forth. Never happened. But then that made me finally go and read The Confidence Code for Women. So that's the backstory. This book, to me, it's called The Confidence Code. It's actually not for women. Sorry. The Confidence Code, The Science and Art of Self-Assurance, What Women Should Know. Katty K, Claire Shipman. Katty K is the BBC America anchor. Claire Shipman's been on CNN, ABC, whatever. The point of this book is, or the, I guess the what do I want to say? The thesis is, why are some people more confident than others? And it obviously mostly focuses on women, but it's also men. And the idea is, you're born that way. Nature versus nurture. So you're nurtured into being confident or not. And then can you learn to be confident? And the answer is yes, all of those things. So some people are born more confident. Some people have that nurtured in them. And then you can learn how to be more confident. And that's one of the things I love the most about this book, is at the end, there's 10 ways to learn to become more confident. And so I actually did, on The Things I Know a couple of years ago, I spent 10 weeks going through each one
I
of these
remember that. I remember.
topics.
So
Yeah.
good.
And I go back to them all the time when I'm talking to clients. And so some of my favorites are,
I was just going to ask you. So
yeah.
thanks.
Well, I'm ahead of the
Pen
game.
ready. Pen ready.
Yeah, pencil down. I mean, I just cannot recommend this book enough. It is so interesting, because one of the things they're talking to women that are high up. They talk to, I can't remember her name, Christine, I think is her first name, the woman that heads up the World Bank, or I don't know if she still does. She's French, but was at the time. They talk to Valerie Jarrett, who, was a very close advisor to President Obama. They talk to WNBA basketball players. Again, these, and the basketball player one was really fascinating, because they share a story around what happens when women lose a game versus men lose a game. And women, we ruminate, and we feel like we've let everyone down, and but the men who lose a game, in the NBA, they lost a game. They're going on the next one. Yeah. Now, I want a presence right now. This isn't about bashing men at all. It's biologically, our brains are different.
It's a fascinating study.
Oh my God, it's so good. And the idea that, our brains are different. And the one thing that's really different about women's brains is we hold a lot of possibilities in our head, and it can be paralyzing. And that is, so one of the tips is, we all want our ducks in a row. Women tend to want all the ducks in a row before we go out and do anything, because of imperfection. We don't want to fail. And if we are always waiting for every duck to be in a row before we do anything, we will do nothing. Exactly. So it's that sort of just being paralyzed with too many choices, with too many things. So that one, coupled with fail fast, which is comes from the tech industry, and it's the idea of like throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall, for lack of a better word, and finding out what sticks, and so if a tech company has put out 10 apps and only one of them works, sure, they've spent the money on that, but they're going to focus now on that one app, so it's the idea of going ahead and failing, because failing isn't bad. You learn what works and what doesn't work. What do you want to tweak? What don't you want to tweak? Which we talked about with Crisis of Confidence, and we talked about, we've talked about in Starting Over. So yeah, the fail fast, the women wanting their ducks in a row. There's, one of them is just like, just do it, which I guess is sort of fail fast as well. But it's absolutely a book that it's well worn. It is a game changer. And it was I identify as somebody that's pretty confident, even though we just did Crisis of Confidence last week. Yeah. And I'm the one that has it. But so when I read this,
you can be a confident person with good self and reflection and awareness when you have a crisis.
True. But it was fascinating to understand as somebody who is pretty confident and isn't worried about failing fast and isn't worried about ducks in a row and all that stuff, it was fascinating to read sort of, again, the biology behind all of this and recognize that I can help my clients become more confident with this, with this book and with, what I know from it. And now they have, or have had for a couple of years, the Power Code, which is all about how women use power. And that's the next on the list after the one I'm reading now, because I'm certain that's going to be a game changer as well. It's very fascinating. Again, the theory of it is interesting in of itself, which is women, we use power. When we have power, we use it for good, and men use it because they want to keep it. Not
You know,
disparaging men, it's just different.
listening to you, I don't know if you're going to remember right away, but the day you landed here in Portland,
Yeah.
we went out. We visited my friend at the winery, and
Yes.
she's been part owner with her husband. They've been part owners in this really successful winery, and she was reflecting about how both of them are part of this, and like how she's reflecting constantly, wanting to make sure she's handing over things really well to the part that she does, the counterpart who's taken over for her. And she's like, aren't you? And he's like, no, like he is absolutely confident he did the best he could, and like they'll do the best they can. And she's like ruminating and thinking about it. And then later we went out with two people that were at our retreat, some friends of mine, and same thing, like, aren't you like wondering if this could have got no? Like with they're talking about their husbands. In
Yeah.
that case, it wasn't shared work, but it was life things about jobs, or about, how they're doing finances or whatever. There's just there's so much like envy on
Mm.
one hand of like, they don't sweat that. And then also just frustration. They don't sweat that.
Yeah, I mean, and we probably said this in another pod. There's that famous study that says, men apply for jobs when they feel 60% qualified, and women don't apply for jobs unless they feel 100% qualified.
Exactly.
And there's nothing wrong with applying for a job when you feel 60% qualified. I just wish women would do that. As I think I mentioned last week, like I'm kind of jonesing to get back and work with a company. And so as I see jobs come through, I read it, because some of them I realize are not actual jobs, which is annoying. Um, but there's been a couple of times where I have had to physically say out loud to myself, I don't have all these things, but if they meet me, they're going to love me. I'm going to apply.
Mhm.
Now, unfortunately, in the job world at this point in time, bots read those resumes. And if I don't have the right keywords, who knows if they'll ever meet me. But, I've kept that idea in my head as I'm applying for roles, because I'm like, I don't have all these things, but I have most of these things. And that's all that matters. Job descriptions, a wish list for a company anyway, you know. So I think there's nothing wrong with the way men do it. I just wish we did it more. And
And
there are men that have the same self-confidence issues
sure.
too,
And
right?
there's women who don't sweat things either.
Right.
So it isn't. It tends to like, we tend to see it more often in men than women, like the confidence in work. I think men and women both. I coached men too with a lot of imposter syndrome
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
But they might be confident enough to apply, then they get there and they're like, I don't know what
Right.
I'm doing. But
Right.
you're right, women just won't go for it unless they feel like they do. That's so interesting. I really
Well,
want to read it. I have
it,
not read it.
oh, you will love it. Again, and then I'll go to your book. But I think the other piece that was really fascinating, which I already sort of touched on, is the biology of this. The thing about what the way our brains work is we hold a lot of possibilities, which is great as a mom and a caretaker and all those things. But what that means is some of those possibilities are the bad things, And so going back to your example, it's not that men just, they don't see things the way we do. And they're wired that way, the way we are wired this way. Talk about envy. Yeah, I'd love to not see all the ways shit could go wrong. You know what I mean? But it's knowing that your brain works that way. Because I also think women, when because we hold all those possibilities, we shame ourselves for thinking, oh, but I'm always thinking things could go wrong. And so that was part of what I loved about this book, was normalizing how we are in the world so that we can, if we know, okay, yes, I'm going to see that this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong, and I'm still going to do it, then that's where your confidence goes up. Because yeah, it might happen, but it also might not, so if you know things could go wrong and you still power through, that is where if you have a thermometer of confidence, it goes all the way up when you still do those things, whether it goes the way you want it to or not. So yes, highly, highly, highly recommend The Confidence Code, Katty K and Claire Shipman. And of course, we'll be putting links to all of this in our show
Well,
notes.
thank you for sharing those, because that's really intriguing.
What about you? What's your next one?
I was thinking like I had one in mind and then another one just popped up. So maybe it's a tie. Like what I just thought of. So I'll say honorable mention, because I come back to it. I refer to it a lot in past retreats I've done, is Sovereignty of Love, Coming Home with Ho'oponopono, by Alea, sorry, Denoyles. I'm probably butchering her name. I've never known how to pronounce her name. But I love that one because it's a beautiful, it's a little bit fictional and also just into folklore of folklore and just the history of Ho'oponopono, and which literally means to make whole again in Hawaiian, and but like that journey with yourself, how to return to just that bright light after all the ways we block it, and the way we go around in the world growing up believing things that aren't true, and get so far from ourselves. So it's a beautiful return to self, and I often give it as a gift to my clients. But
Nice.
the book I was thinking of that I first read, God, like 10 years ago, was it? The Untethered Soul by Michael
Oh
Allen
yeah,
Singer. Did you ever read that?
I have not.
I think because maybe it's just the right time in my journey, it helped me finally understand what people mean by inner peace.
Oh,
And
interesting.
also just like, because for me, it meant freedom from negative thoughts, right? And not that we're ever going to have total, like you said, intrusive thoughts happen. I don't know if you said that on camera or off. I
I
can't
did say
remember.
that off. I
Okay.
had intrusive thoughts when I was in depression during
Yes,
the surgery.
as we do.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what some of that is, intrusive thoughts. So I mean, to be human is to have positive and negative thoughts. It's not that, like, freedom from like living in negative thoughts, I guess. Living
Mm.
in like a endless cycle of negativity. And not, I don't think that's who I am. I think at my base, I am not someone who, but like I'm in relationship with people in my life, like whether they're family, friends, or my own kids, like where it's really helpful to understand what that means and to come from that place, just to be a safe person, but also be taking care of myself. And um, it discussed the concept of mindfulness in a way that I was like, the two books I was reading at the time was this one and Mindfulness, which is also a great book. But really understanding how to let go of inner resistance to things, like how to let go
Mm.
of feeling tethered to like, this is how it should be, what your expectations are,
So letting go of the outcome.
attachment. Yeah, letting go of attachment to outcome.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of beautiful, insights that just resonated deeply with me. So um, I can't always remember them all, but it's like this comforting feeling, and I'll go back to it and just read a chapter, or I'll, find something that's really appropriate for someone I'm working with. And
Mm.
it's just a beautiful reset
Mm.
on that, like, just internal freedom of everything's temporary. And when you let go of your attachment to those things, there's so much joy, even in hard times.
Yeah. It's so funny. When you came up with this topic, I was like, gosh, I don't know if I can come up with books, but I know even as we're talking, I'm thinking of all these other books. You talk about going back to it. I mean, another great one is Four Agreements, where you can go back to that and just write and just grab something. That felt like one of those books that I was the last person in the world to read because it's such a staple of coaches and personal growth
Yeah.
and all of that, but another just absolutely mind-blowing one. I love the ones, and you're saying it sounds like this with pretty much both or all three of the books that you're talking about. Whereas I don't necessarily do this with the Confidence Code. I guess I probably do when I talk about my next book, but it sounds like these are books that you know so intimately that you know exactly what you need to go in and read a little snippet of, to either for yourself or for your client. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. There'll be like I'll sometimes. I mean, you hear me do it here a lot. I'm like, oh, who wrote that again? Or, there's something about that, and then that'll niggle. Like it's a niggling thought, and so
Yeah.
I'll go and look for it. Um, just funny saying that. I like that there's something that makes me go look it up because we always say like our kids don't have time to be curious anymore because they can just Google it, and like
I
there's
also
certain
love
ways.
that though.
I know. Well, I mean, I do love that I can Google it, but I love that sometimes I need to open something and go in search of it, and like actually,
Yes.
it's good for my brain and
Yeah.
to like to be in search of something like that, and then
Mm.
kind of sit with it because if it didn't, I might miss something.
Plus,
So
you might
I do
end up
that.
catching, not thinking as you're scrolling, not scrolling, as you're flipping through, right?
Yeah.
Plus, there's nothing better than the smell of a book. But as you're
Yes.
flipping through, your eye might catch on something else you weren't even looking for, which could be exactly right, or probably is exactly right at the time. So yeah, you're right. I mean, you can fall down a rabbit hole on Google. Don't let's not be wrong about that. But yeah, I like that idea of it's kind of active versus just,
That's what
oh, I can go Google it.
you just said it exactly. I think it's helpful for me to stay on point if I go to like my bookshelf versus for me to Google
Mm.
because I can't even tell you, like I'm definitely living in a time in my life. It's another reason why Untethered Soul is so great because it helps me let go of the distractions when I
Mm.
settle into like what it's inviting me back to. But like the other day, I probably had like five different things going at once, and then I go to look something up, and then it got me somewhere else on Google. So like I've got like all these tabs open, and I have like physical, literal tabs open. Like I had everything cleaned out of a cabinet that I was reorganizing. I had half half of my like I was repotting some plants. They were like half done. I had laundry half. It was the weirdest thing, and I was like, oh my gosh, like
All
I'm
the tabs.
all the tabs and like physical and so yes, you just said it. I think I like going to a book to find something in there because there's only so many things I can find. I can't get too
Right.
distracted. Although I guess I could go there and be like, I need to dust this shelf. I don't know.
Right. Yep. I mean, we are at a time in our life where I walk into a room like, I'm going to go do this. And then I do five other things. And then I walk in, I was like, God damn it, I didn't even do the thing I said I was going to do.
It's that George Carlin stand-up routine about being stoned, like going to his garage to get something, get a broom, but then he's like, I gotta sweep this place. Oh my gosh, here's my old baseball card collection. Like there's
A
and
100%. A hundred
without
percent.
the high, that is me.
Yeah. Bummer.
I know. You have
Amazing.
another one too, right?
I do. And I feel really
You
lucky
mentioned it. Yeah.
that I actually physically know this woman. So my other book is The Wealthy Spirit,
Oh wow.
Daily Affirmations for Financial Stress Reduction by Chellie Campbell, Chellie. Again, we'll put a link to Amazon if you want to get this book, which again, if you are one of my clients or maybe even one of my past students, you know how many times I've recommended this book. So my story on this is in 2019 at an HCI retreat. And in fact, I think we talked about this probably when we had Carrie Peters on. We did a money meditation. Again, something I do with my clients all the time that really gets you clear on your relationship with money. And I had decided for whatever reason in 2019 that I was going to make that my year of working on my relationship with money. And I went to a networking event and I met Chellie. I had never seen her there before. I didn't go much longer to this particular event, but I never saw her again. But that day was March. I just remember all this so clearly. And Chellie got up and did her little spiel. Now, she is a trained actress and she is a goddamn hoot. I mean, this woman she is just so fun to be around. And I can't say it because it's so good. I can't remember it and say it the way she is, but her little elevator pitch is so funny. And I just remember thinking, okay, at the end of this meeting, I'm going to go talk to her. So I did. I went over and introduced myself, and just lovely, lovely woman. And then she's really, really good at follow up. And so she called me within a couple of days. And again, she just like, she feels like one of those people the minute you meet her, she is like your best friend. She's just so sweet. And it's interesting because
Awesome.
I do have a couple of students that I had shared this book with, And just the other day, one of my students who lives in Australia, I mean, from years ago, Chellie wished her a happy birthday. And I was like, wait, and I was like, oh, I introduced them. So they became friends on Facebook.
That's
Anyways,
so cool.
yeah. One of our future guests, Susan Liddy, knows her too. So anyway, so we got to talking. She has a financial stress reduction course. So I ended up taking that course. It was fabulous. But in that, she also has this book. She's written a couple, but what's so great about this book is it is a page a day. And it's a little story and it's an affirmation. And it's just amazing. And so you just read it year after year. Now, I read it in 2020. I was very diligent about reading it every day. Again, that was my year of reading books, so it was easy. And I would write down my affirmations and I kind of kept all of them. And I was writing like over and over again. So at some point I was writing like 100 affirmations, and then I stopped. And 2020 was my best year. I mean, it was my best year financially. Granted, I was working with HCI as well, but with Transformation for Real. But 2021, whatever, life got in the way. I stopped reading it. I stopped doing my little sort of grounding every day. And I've never had as good a financial year ever since then. And so this
Interesting.
year, yeah. And she talks about it in the book in one of the readings is around like, how many people are humming along, they're doing their affirmations, everything's great. And then they kind of stop and then things aren't as good anymore. And they come to her all boo hoo hoo. And she's like, are you still doing your affirmations? And they're like, oh no, I'm not. And, and, and she's like, well, do them. And they start again and things go better.
So true. That means that's true of everything, right? When I'm eating better, when I'm exercising.
Totally.
Like,
But then you get on this place where you're like, I got this, and you
right.
don't got this. This is part of the
Right.
grounding, right?
Mhm.
So I made a conscious decision this year. I'm like, I'm doing it every day. Now, there's been a couple of days, just obviously surgery, things happened where I've forgotten. And so I go back and read, but for all intents and purposes, I am reading a page a day, doing my affirmations. And regardless of however my year turns out financially, it's so grounding and it feels so good to have these affirmations to just start my day off with,
Yeah.
So one of my favorites, there's two in here that I combined together. It's like, I make great money doing what I love. And I don't remember the other one, but I added it to that one. So it's, I make great money doing what I love. I do it for my good and the good of others. And I
Mm.
love that because yes, it's about obviously charity and everything, but I also look at that as if I'm not making money coaching, I can't coach, and
Mhm.
so the good of others is not just about donations and charity. It's about my ability to be a coach, because like, unfortunately we have to make money at doing this.
Yeah.
So it's just really fantastic. So I was telling Chellie that we were going to do this, and I said I wanted to remind people because what's cool now is she has a Facebook group. It's a membership group, but she shows up every day, does one of these readings, talks about it. So it's like getting her course over the course of the year. And I will put all this in there, but for the first 30 days, it's just $7.
Oh, nice.
And then after that, it's only $47, but she does a 10-minute video every day, Monday through Friday, from pages of the book with updates, backgrounds, and special info. So she said it's like taking a year-long course for $500.
Wow.
It's well worth it
Oh,
because
so it's like 47 a month or something?
47 a month. The first month though, you do get for $7 to try it out,
Nice.
and it's no commitment. You can stop after the 30 days if you want, but she's the one that introduced me to the networking group that I go to now so much. And I know a lot of people in that group that show up every day and they just talk about how amazing that group is because, she does the 10-minute video every day, but there's all this interaction within this membership,
Yeah,
and
and what you pay
support.
attention to grows, and it's so
100%.
true.
Yeah.
That's so true. Well,
So
that's inspiring. I love
yeah,
that. And
Chellie's really
I
cool.
feel like you've always, since I got to know you better, you've always had, well, two things. Like you've always these kind of things that really work for you because you're good at consistency. You're good at showing up for yourself, but also you've often maybe because of her book, you've often said, oh, don't give, like you said to me right before we came in, right? If you like, if you, I was talking about how I'm really not trying to invite more medical drama into my family's life. And
Right.
you said, exactly. I think, the fact that you're not, it means that you guys are getting through it and you're moving through it. And I was like, oh, that's a
Right.
great way to think about it instead of like, oh, poor me. I'm
Yeah.
not giving into it. I'm just aware of it, but it could be worse if I was giving into it. I think you're always great at where to put your attention.
I mean, I try. I mean, I think like anything, I have failures. There are or times that it doesn't work as well for me. I think I've said this in the recent pods. We are looking down the barrel of a very large college bill, and we never saved for college. We just didn't. We made an active choice not to. And Liam went a much less expensive route, and it was exactly right for him. This is going to be exactly right for Charlotte. I'm super excited. But as I'm laying in post-op depression and we're, FAFSA bullshit and all the things, and just in general thinking about our money flying out the door to college, I had some really days where like I had to actively, again, kind of almost out loud say to myself, everything is always working out for me. It always has. It will continue. But right now I am feeling really constricted around money, So maybe that's the reason I'm reading it this year. It's not going to be so much about so much money in my business, but it's to remind me that money has always been there for me.
Yes.
And this reading a page a day of the Wealthy Spirit helps remind me,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
it's crazy that one of my favorites that I say every day is money is flowing to me both from expected and unexpected places,
Mm.
because I think, and she talks about magic money, and we think so much about money coming in from payments and this, and it's but what about that random time you get you get a refund back you weren't expecting, or you find $20 on the ground? I mean, that all counts. That's your money
Yeah.
that came to you.
Yeah. Brendan and I
Um,
always we always feel like we get an income when we just check in and look at how, like, if we look at what we're spending and some of the like things we weren't aware of, and
yep,
then we just like, as we tighten that, all of a sudden a lot more money is coming
that's
our way.
exactly it.
It feels like, and also, yeah, just certain ways of paying more attention to it give you a raise, um, in ways that you didn't expect. So I love that.
My final tip on this one, because I this is was one of my favorites that I remember from the first time around. I don't even think I've gotten there yet this year, but she talks about, in fact, we sort of had this conversation. She talks about, when money's going out the door. And that's what I realized my issue was back in 2019 when I did that money meditation. Was I thought I had a good relationship with money. I believed in the laws of attraction for as long as I can remember. But where it can't, what happened in that meditation was I realized I was angry at the money coming in and going right back out. And so
Ah,
she talks about, of course, back, nobody writes checks anymore, but if you're writing a check, writing thank you in the notes section, or so I try to do that as I'm hitting send on something. And then the other one was about taxes. And you and I were just talking about this with our LLC, thinking about taxes not as all the things we don't want it to go to, but all the things it does go to. So
right.
as you're writing your tax bill, think about the firemen and the beautification and the roads upkeep and all these things, versus like, oh, it's going to war and it's going to the politicians and it's doing that. Don't think of it that way. Think about assume your tax money is going to all the things you love. So
No, that's
again,
a
it's
good
just these
one.
little gems that just burrow into your head. And so when you're feeling constricted about money, it's a great
Yeah.
thing to go back to.
It's funny you say that. I just wrote a check. I've been writing a lot of checks for this remodel.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, this is really helpful. And in fact, no time like the present for me to read it when people are like, "What are you guys doing this summer?" I'm like, "We're gonna enjoy my new floor, and my new bathroom."
I'm just gonna sit on the bathroom floor.
Because that's where all our money went this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, but I mean, obviously, I'm so lucky that I was able to figure out how to do this, and so you're right. It's a great way. I love that, just the title, "Wealthy Spirit."
Yeah.
That's a good one. We
Yeah,
got
it's
good
really
ones.
good. I really, Chellie Campbell. Awesome.
It's, and there's so many new things that are like popping in my head. Oh, I should tell you about this book that I read
Well,
every
I was
day. Oh, I
gonna
should
say,
tell you.
let's, I mean, those are our two go-tos, but like I do want to share some of the other stuff we've been
Yeah,
reading. So
we
what are
will.
some of the things that you've been loving? Maybe that's fiction or
Well,
just
it's funny.
whatever.
I had gotten this book from the library and then I had to return it before I got to it because, of probably
God.
sleep stuff. And so
Mm,
I borrowed it from somebody, and it's by Kate Atkinson, who I've loved her other books. Years and years ago, I loved Behind the Museum. I think
mm,
she's just a really beautiful writer. But this one called Life After Life um, is the character Ursula Todd. She's born, I think it's like it's early 20th century, and like she's born at the exact same time and like another baby's born and doesn't make it, and it really like parallels it's really just all about the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and like chances at life, and almost like a sliding doors kind of thing. And it's just beautifully written, and I'm loving it. And I'm almost like I can feel the when I'm reading really good fiction, I can feel like getting bummed that it's coming to an end. Like
yeah.
I remember feeling that so big with the book that you and I discovered we both loved, which is The Night Circus.
Yep.
I remember just devouring it and then slowing down because I
Yep.
didn't want
Yep.
it to be over.
Totally. Yep.
And it's funny because I told my kids it was such a good book and that they were so lucky they were going to be reading it in English class, and they didn't love it the way I loved it.
That's
And
interesting.
and I just remember being like, but it's like, but maybe you're not reading it right.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not
Yeah.
understanding it. That's how I get so attached to fictional characters that I'm like
Mm,
curling up with. So that's currently something I love. I am liking the book How to Break Up with Your Phone, and I also started recently reading. It's slower, but I'm liking it. How to Know a Person, which
mm,
was funny to my whole family that I would read that because they think that that's what I'm so excellent at naturally.
right.
Why would you need to read that? Do we need to read that? And I was like, I love it because it is something I geek out about, like how to hold
Right.
space for people, how to not just see people, but understand how I'm seeing people naturally, energetically anyway, and like trying, just kind of seeing it from a different kind of brain way. I think you would like it too. It's interesting. But
Yeah,
anyway,
that one sounds well, it's like me reading the confidence code. It's like,
yeah,
I mean, it's just
right.
when something is natural to you, it's interesting to understand why it's natural to you or why it's not natural to other people.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then I just noticed like Peter will go through some of my old books, like Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, or like,
Mm,
Václav Havel, which I was a huge fan of. So like some autobiographical, works by some leaders that, we both admire. So it reminds me like how much I um, want to dabble back in that. It's a better way for me to be in touch with things historical that also matter today versus just reading the news and getting pummeled by it. So anyway, it's fun when Peter's home because he reads so many books, so many
yeah,
books.
lands
I
that way.
remember he had a whole suitcase of books when we went away for 6 weeks together. Like most of his luggage was books, and so it's always really fun to talk to him about what he's reading.
I love that.
How about
So
you?
I will end with the Liam book, but yeah, so the main book I read over over my post-op, which I joked that maybe it wasn't the right book to read exactly. And I'll tell the story in a second, but I read Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney.
Mm.
I absolutely agree with her in no way, shape, or form about 100% of her policies, but back in during the January 6th committee and January 6th in general, there were very few Republicans who said this is bullshit and this is scary and I can't believe nobody is a lot of Republicans came out January 7th and was like, "Oh my god, this is horrible. He caused all this blah blah blah." And then they all slowly but surely bowed down to Trump, and her and Adam Kinzinger and a handful of others did not. They also did not keep their Senate and House seats because of that. And so to read this book, I actually got it for Darren because he calls her his hair girlfriend. He loves her hair.
That's
I don't
funny.
know. He's a weirdo. But he read it and he was like, "Holy crap, this is really good. This should be something everybody reads." And I actually heard another person, just a layman, who had been a mega person who read it and was like, and it changed his mind. And he was on the news saying everyone should read this book. Because it is only about January 6th and the committee, and it's not about her life. I mean, yes, she's talking about her dad and other itty bitty things and losing her or her House seat and everything, but for the most part, it is very specifically about January 6th. And again, she voted with Trump 90% of the time, so it's not like she is without.
I think that made her more credible.
Well, I think it did. Yeah, I mean, and technically it should have, but it didn't. I mean, MAGA is MAGA, and they are hardwired at this stage of the game. And but it was really, really interesting to watch. I think some of my favorite part of this, and I remember Darren telling me at the time as well, two things jumped out. One, she had never really had any kind of relationship, as you would not, with Nancy Pelosi, because they could not be farther apart on the spectrum. But Nancy Pelosi was very supportive of her. When other people on the committee said, no, let's not do this, Nancy was always behind her. So she tells a story about before Nancy Pelosi offered her the position on the committee. I guess Nancy Pelosi's aides came in with every bad thing Liz Cheney had ever said about her. And Nancy Pelosi at the end was like, so? And then went and that really, like, to Liz Cheney, that really endeared her. She was like, okay, this person's right. I have three things. The other thing was she says it very briefly, but she said going into her first committee meeting, because it was just her and Adam Kinzinger and everybody else was Democrats, she realized how seriously Democrats take everything. There was no infighting, there was no bitching, there was no one-upmanship or grandstanding at this committee. Like, the Democrats come in and they do their work. And she's like, that was never like that when I was on committees that were with Republicans. So I thought that was interesting. And then my final one that Darren said he told me and I had forgotten at some point, I don't know where she was. I don't think she was in Ohio. I think she was in DC, but apparently a student from Miami University, love and honor, where I went to college, came up to her and said, I don't agree with anything, but I support everything you're doing here. I'll do anything to help you get reelected. Again, she didn't, but so I think it is a very important read. Even if you believe like we do that's a load of bullshit, it's still really fascinating to see the behind the scenes machinations. I would like to read one from somebody on the Democrat side, because I'm hearing all the sort of Republican parts of it,
right.
I mean, she talks about everybody else on the committee, but this is her experience, right? So I would love to read like a Jamie Raskin or somebody else that was on that committee, their side of it. So that one.
This is such a fascinating time.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I mean, if you would have told me during the Iraq War that I would read something from Liz Cheney, I'd have been like, you're crazy. But it's so important. And then I guess my final one, which is my current read, and this goes back to where I began, which is a book that I've had forever. So you just mentioned The Night Circus, and that's by Erin Morgenstern. I can't remember. I think Liam read it first, loved it. And then I read it, loved it. And I think this is her follow-up. It's The Starless Sea. And Liam read it and was just like, oh my God, this is the best book I've ever read. Like, fell so deeply in love with it that for Christmas that year, Irina got him a Starless Sea candle. So it was a candle she bought off of Etsy that was supposed to smell like the Starless Sea. And that same year we were out and he went to a bookstore with Darren and he got me a copy. That was in 2022. And I kept trying to read it. I kept going in. It is an interesting, you've read this, right? I think you said you read The Starless Sea.
I picked it up. That's one of the ones, like, I have not, like, I think I read a chapter and then I want to say, like, I packed it up when we moved out and I don't know where it is right now. I got to unpack it.
Gotcha. Well, it's an interesting, the way it goes back and forth. I don't really yet know what The Starless Sea is. I have an idea, but I'm only halfway through and I don't want to spoiler alert anyways, but it goes back and forth between fictional story and, I mean, it's all fiction, but like the story of the Starless Sea and the story of this guy. And so it's one of those things, and I think I just didn't have the brain space for whatever reason to be able to get into the rhythm of it. It's one of those books that needs some rhythm.
Yeah.
And I said to Darren, and Darren read it before me. I don't think he liked it as much as I did, which again, I was like, you didn't read it right. He liked it. He just didn't like it as much as Liam and I did. But it's um either one of these books, either one of these books could have been its own book. Like the book about the Starless Sea is really great, and the book about this character is really great. But
Yeah.
once you get into the rhythm of it, it's really fun. It's
Oh, I
really,
can't
really
wait to
cool.
find it. I wonder.
Yeah.
I kind of have an idea what box it's in, but we're still unpacking, moving back in.
Yes. Yeah. So
Uh,
Starless Sea.
now I remember you saying that Darren didn't like it as much, and you and Liam were like, oh.
Well, I wasn't, because I was like, I haven't read it yet, but I luckily, Liam's coming into town here this weekend, and I'm excited to talk to him about it. I've already been texting him and been like, oh my God, I love this part. Oh my God, I love this part. So I think I can tell I love Liam because for a million reasons, obviously, but he hasn't held it against me that it's taken me a year and a half to get to it. He comes in and be like, have you started the Starless Sea yet? And I'm like, no, but he doesn't care. And so now that I'm into it, I think he's excited that I'm reading it. So that's good.
That's nice you have Liam coming home. I have Peter home, and we had our former nanny over the other night, and she was like, "What have you been up to?" He goes, "She has a podcast. She has some really great guests."
Oh, I love it.
I was like, "Yes, Peter was a guest. That was
That's
Liam."
so funny. I love that. Before we end, although I'm realizing as we speak, we don't have a song. Did you pick a song?
I didn't.
Okay, while I tell my story, why don't
Maybe
you pick one?
because, yeah, maybe because we got a little thrown off before we had someone reschedule. So it's so funny. Okay, you tell your story.
Okay,
I'll
I'll
pick
tell my
one. It'll
story.
be really random.
So,
Let me think about it.
yes. Yeah, we'll figure out something. I've got one. Nope, I've got one.
Okay.
I've got a song. So we'll go back to that in a second because it's actually perfect. Um,
Okay.
So the one thing I'll end with though before is, speaking of Liam, is one of my favorite books. If you would ask me, I would say one of my favorite books of all time, hands down, is Time Traveler's Wife.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I've read it twice. I don't often read books over, and I've read Time Traveler's Wife twice. I remember I read it when Liam was a baby, I think is when it came out. Audrey Nieffenegger is actually from Chicago. She went to or taught at Columbia College, which is why we ended up in Chicago to begin with, because Darren went there. And so there was already that Chicago, and it's set in Chicago, so that's fun and all that kind of stuff. But I just remember sitting outside in the sun while Liam was napping with my little, thing to listen to him, and bawling, bawling, bawling at the end.
Mm.
Now, fast forward to Liam comes in one day, is like, tell me your favorite book. And I hand him Time Traveler's Wife. He couldn't finish it. He hated it. And
Interesting.
he hated it because he doesn't like the fact that even though ultimately they end up the same age, initially the guy is old and is in love with the little girl because he time travels. So it
Got
just
it.
he's like, I'm sure I could get through it. I have no feelings about you liking it. He's like, but I could not do that. So it's just
Mm.
interesting that, again, that's 22 years ago I read this book. So even in this 22 times with Me Too and all these things, it's funny how something that I love so much, it didn't taint it for me. So I still am like, okay, you do you. But I found that a really fascinating conversation,
You know what's funny is you just reminded me, like, forever I was like there's two books that I just recommend everywhere to everyone. Master and Margarita. I don't know if you ever read that.
Mm-mm.
Belle Bulgakov. And then Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins, right? Yeah.
Okay.
I read like, yeah, Jitterbug Perfume. So, and he wrote Skinny Legs and All and Peripheral and Meaning, I believe. No, he wasn't Peripheral and Meaning. But I read that at the same time, which is another book I loved. But anyway, Tom Robbins, Jitterbug Perfume, one of my favorite books of all time. I loved it. I've read it many times, and it always, like, I always find something new and different. And there's a bit of time travel in that as well, like different eras, different, like different almost incarnations, and
Mm.
it's so good. And then I get a little bummed when, people are like, oh, I don't, this is what I didn't like about it. And so I have, it's been a while since I recommended those two. I mean, I have, probably a short list of books like that, but those two stand out to me when you said that. I hadn't thought about that in a long time, where I'm like, well, I like this one.
Yeah.
It's the most, like, those two books are the ones that are the most worn copies. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So it dawned on me what I wanted to do. And I think it's a perfect song because we are also in an era right
Mm.
now, oddly, that books are being banned. And The Handmaid's Tale, there was just that story of the woman handing the Handmaid's Tale to her principal or superintendent as she graduated because it was a banned book. They weren't allowed, I don't know where she was, but we're seeing it left and right. And it's just a slippery fucking slope to ban books. So the song I'm going to pick, I don't even know if it matters, but I love this song. I've loved this song since I was 18. It's called Books on the Bonfire by the Bolshoi, little known band I fucking love. I'm just going to read these lyrics. It doesn't really matter, but it might. Says, they put all the books on the bonfire, 2,000 years in a flame. I run like a horse in a fairground. Rewind me and play me again. Once I was a boy, which seems sunny to me. Yes, I threw my stones, read my books, climbed those trees. What can I say to you, mister? Yes, I've been drinking again. You can beat my brains, but don't kiss me again. Doesn't really land per se, but that song is one of my favorites of all time. So, and it says books. So that's what we're going with.
It's funny when you said books on a bonfire, you reminded me that one of my favorite books that I didn't expect to love as much as I did was Book Thief, because
Oh
there's
yeah.
definitely a couple scenes of books on a bonfire there. And you just brought me
Yeah.
back to that imagery. I didn't like the movie as much, but I really loved the book.
This pod went on longer than I thought it was going to go, but this was fun. See, I like talking. We're doing some lighthearted stuff, even though we got into some politics there, but still,
Yeah. Well, it is still funny that you're reading a book by Liz Cheney.
it is funny. It is definitely not my brand.
Well, all right. This was great. I think we're gonna do one about things we're watching too. So I
Next will
think
be
it's
TV.
fun. It's fun because it's making us realize there's a lot more we hadn't thought about in a while. But like, oh yeah, this, oh yeah, that one. It makes me. I love listening to what you're reading. So
Yeah,
thank you.
right back at you. Yes. So next week we're going to talk about TV shows we're watching, and then we're going to talk about some of our favorite movies. So all of July, all 5 Tuesdays is going to be fun topics that hopefully are a little lighthearted for the summer pod listening.
And also, gosh, you know what would make it even better is if we heard from you. What are you reading? What are you watching? What are you recommending? It's always so fun to like have someone introduce something I had not thought of.
100%. And look, Carrie wants to read my books. I want to read hers. So let's hear yours so we can add to our books we aren't reading, in my case. All right, everyone. Thanks as usual. And we will be back next week.
Goodbye.